We're on lesson 3 of chapter 2, which is subtracting integers. First, we're going to subtract integers by adding the opposite. Then we're going to evaluate expressions with integers. Then we'll solve a real-world problem. We're going to go back to Jeopardy, just like we did when we were adding integers. If you remember, Dr. Smith got his first question wrong, and he had negative 500 points for that. He got his second question right, which gave him 600 points. When you add those totals together, he now has positive 100 for his score. But now think of this for an example. Let's say the Jeopardy host decided to be really nice and said, you know what, that first question you got wrong, I'm going to take away that negative value from your score. Do you think that Jeopardy host did Dr. Smith a favor? Well, sure. He took away a negative value. So instead of having his score at 100, his score went up 500 to 600 then. So by taking away or subtracting a value, the number went up. So addition by subtraction. It's an interesting concept, and let's expand on that a little more with this number line. So if we have 2 as our starting number, and we're told to take away a negative 3, this is pretty similar to what just happened over here. We're taking away a negative value, which is like a good thing. And what we're going to be doing today is going to be adding the opposite. So for example, this would be 2, add instead of subtract, the opposite of negative 3, which is positive 3. And then we would move over 3 to get our answer at positive 5. For this one, 3 minus 8. If 3 is our starting point and we're subtracting a positive 8, taking away a positive value is a bad thing. So if we're going to rewrite this, we could say 3 plus instead of minus. The opposite of positive 8 is negative 8. And just like last time, when we add a negative value, we move 8 to the left, which gives us a value of negative 5 for our answer. Let's look at this last one, negative 4 minus 2. So if negative 4 is our starting point, we are taking away a positive value. And we don't want to do that, but we have to. So we have negative 4 plus the opposite of positive 2, which is negative 2. So negative 4 plus negative 2, adding negative 2 moves it to the left, which becomes negative 6. Let's do a few more practice problems here. We're going to also subtract integers here by adding the opposite. So try to follow along here and see if you can see what I'm doing. We have 5 minus a positive 9. So subtracting a positive is the same thing as adding a negative. Subtracting a positive is the same thing as adding a negative. So if we have 5 plus negative 9, we can follow the rules. Here we have a positive, here we have a negative. The signs are different, meaning we find the difference between them. 9 is bigger than 5 by 4, and the negative had the bigger number, so negative 4. Here we have negative 9 minus negative 2. So let's add that opposite. Negative 9 plus instead of minus, the opposite of negative 2, positive 2. Negative 9 plus positive 2, the signs are different, meaning that we find the difference. 9 is bigger than 2 by 7, and since the bigger number was negative, our answer is negative. Let's look at this one, negative 4 minus 3. So here we have negative 4, and we're going to be adding the opposite of positive 3, so negative 3. Now you'll notice our signs are the same. We have a negative and a negative. In that case, we find the sum of the two numbers. 4 plus 3 is 7. And then we keep the sign, which is negative. Let's try a few expressions with these integers. Here we have evaluate a minus b for each set of values. So here we have a as negative 6 and b as 7. So if we replace that a with negative 6, then we're subtracting, and we replace that b with a 7, negative 6 minus 7. We're going to follow that same rule that we did last slide, where we were adding the opposite. So we still have this negative 6, but we're adding instead of subtracting, and then the opposite of positive 7 is going to be negative 7. If you remember our rules, these are both negative signs, meaning that we're adding their absolute values, which gives us 13. 6 plus 7 is 13. Then we keep the sign at negative. Here we have a minus b, where a is 14 and b is negative 9. So 14 goes first as a, then we're subtracting b, which is negative 9. Now let's follow that rule by adding the opposite. So we have 14 and we're adding here. The opposite of negative 9 becomes positive 9. If we follow our rules, we have same sign, right? Positive and positive, so we can find their sum, which is 23, and then keep the sign as positive. Let's look at a word problem. It says find the difference between 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit and negative 250 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperatures the space shuttle must endure. Remember, the key words that we learned from last chapter is it says find the difference. Whenever you need to find the difference, that's going to be a subtraction problem. So that means that we have 3,000 minus the negative 250. So this would be the difference between these two numbers. So that leaves us with 3,000 plus instead of minus. And then the opposite of negative 250 would be positive 250. Adding those together would be 3,250. Then our label would be degrees Fahrenheit. If this doesn't make too much sense to you, just think of it this way. You're finding the difference between these two. Negative 250 is going to take 250 degrees to get back to 0. Then once you're back to 0, you have to get all the way back to positive 3,000. So 250 to get back to 0 plus the 3,000 to get all the way to 3,000 is 3,250 degrees difference.